This should have been Australia's trillion-dollar industry.
In the 1980s, at UNSW, a team made a breakthrough that's in most solar panels today. And in that team was a PhD student who would go back to China and become China's richest billionaire. We created the breakthrough here and sat there and watched China build the factories, create the jobs, and capture the value. And the wildest part is, they didn't really steal it from Australia, we gave it to them. The real fight is not solar versus coal, it's are we a ore exporter or a factory owner? This is about how we build things that power the 21st century and create a more prosperous Australia. If you want Australia to get back at being the best at stuff again, building trillion-dollar industries, chuck me a sub and also check out my newsletter where I talk about this macro stuff, but also very practical stuff on careers and wealth building so you can be part of the solution. The lab that bent the cost curve. Okay, we're back in 1983 at Sydney's UNSW in between the racecourse and Coogee Beach. Life in the 80s in Sydney is peak. You're in a room with a bunch of these blokes led by Professor Martin Green. They look exactly like the kind of guys that would design a revolutionary new solar panel and still be home by 4 o'clock to coach the under-14s cricket. At that time, the solar world was dominated by the giants with big pockets. Think NASA or the big satellite companies. Before 1983, most commercially available solar panels had an efficiency around 12 to 14%. But Professor Green's team at UNSW came up with a breakthrough that would smash through that ceiling and change the solar cost curve forever. And in that lab around that time are two names you need to remember. One is Jianhua Zhang. Xinhua. Jian, how do I say it?
This is the Chinese pronunciation.
One is Jianhua Zhao and a young PhD student, not pictured here, called Zhang Rongxi. And he is going to become the richest man in China. And they also call him the Sun King, which has got to be the most boss nickname of all time. The industry standard was to coat the whole back of panels in metal. But the UNSW team stumbled on a technical anomaly. They discovered a special insulating layer could withstand higher temperatures than the textbooks said that they should have. This allowed them to redesign a cell and led to a panel that would, over time, almost double the efficiency of mass-produced panels. We'd go from the 12% panels of the 80s to the 20 to 24% of today. And at this point in the video, the Australian voice pipes in and goes, "Hey, we could never do industrial scale manufacturing. Our energy is too expensive and our labor cost is too high." Repeat that 3 times in front of a mirror and you turn into a bureaucrat. That mindset will become the end of us as an industrial country because it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The student who took it home. Now, let's go back to our future Chinese billionaire in the UNSW lab, Xi. He was born in 1963 in China, does a bunch of degrees there, and then comes to Sydney to do his PhD under Martin Green. He's working on exactly this kind of high efficiency cell design, shoulder to shoulder with the other Aussie engineers. But it's one thing to design a cell that's really good, and another thing altogether to design the factory that produces it at scale. So that's exactly what they do back in China, right? No, this is actually where it gets really crazy. They first started a plant here in Sydney. In 1995, UNSW and the State Electricity Company spun out a company to commercialize solar technology, and they called it Pacific Solar. And guess who was the deputy research director there? Xi. Yes, Australia actually had plans to commercialize solar. We were just too slow. In 2001, Xi goes home to a city called Wuxi. The local government basically says, "We hear you're the solar guy in Australia, and how can we build a serious company around it?" They put in capital, they help with the land and approvals, and China always does this kind of stuff, by the way. Read Apple in China for a rundown on how they did it with smartphones. Amazing book. And together they create a company called Suntech. 4 years later, Zhang Rongxi is on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. He's created literally China's biggest solar panel maker and has become the billionaire that is China's richest man. Okay, that is one UNSW student, but this is not a one-off. Dr. Xinhua Zhao and Aiwa Wang, they head to China and co-founded China Sun Energy, which would become the second large solar manufacturer in China. Other alumni go on to become CTOs and senior engineers at a whole bunch of Chinese PV companies. And here's the important bit. None of these people stole anything from Australia. They earned that knowledge in a lab and took the risk of building companies in a highly competitive industry back in China. And China in turn backed them, willing to give them capital and regulatory clearance to build these massive factories. Together, these countries made solar incredibly cheap for the rest of the world, but there's no denying that China captured more of the value. So the only question I care about is this: are we going to let it happen with the next trillion-dollar industry? And I'm going to tell you exactly what that trillion-dollar industry is, how Australia cooked it. We've built a barbell economy. On one end, you've got the primary industries, growing stuff, digging stuff up, shipping it out. And on the other end, you've got the tertiary industries, the knowledge work, the bankers, the lawyers in offices. And in the middle, the part where you actually turn raw stuff into complex materials, where we've let it hollow out. In the early 1960s, manufacturing was roughly 30% of our economy and employment. Today, it's 5% of GDP, which is the lowest in the OECD. Now, we're competing with the third world to have the least sophisticated economy. We went all the way from we make cars, TVs, metals, clothes, paper, to we dig rock and pay people to play golf on the NDIS. Solar is just one casualty within that. People online love to blame this on one secret UN plot called the Lima Declaration. This makes it sound like Whitlam signed a piece of paper and magically 30% of our factories vanished. But the truth is actually much more boring and much more Australian. From the 1980s onwards, we did three big things. One, we opened the gates to free trade. We let foreign products, cheaper products flood into the market, and that killed a whole bunch of local manufacturing. And that was probably going to happen anyway. Two, we rode the mining boom. China wanted our ore, so the dollar went up, which made it really difficult for local manufacturers to compete against Asian manufacturers selling into market. Three, we let energy costs creep up, because if you run a furnace or a data center, if your energy bills are more than competitors, you'll eventually tap out. And on top of that, we told ourselves a comforting little story from first year economics called competitive advantage. Our story went something like this. We're blessed with resources and we've got smart people for services. And yeah, factories are kind of gross, so we'll let other countries do those. Looking back from 2025, you can see how flimsy that idea was. Because it might not be obvious, but manufacturing is where a lot of the R&D and innovation and knowledge transfer actually happens. And when you give up making things, making complex things, you not only give up today's profits, but tomorrow's possibility. And the whole idea that everyone specializes and trades nicely forever kind of looks a bit naive in this modern world where supply chains are used as weapons. Solar, again, is a perfect example. So when someone like Zhang Rongxi is deciding to build the massive factory, Australia is saying, hey, we love what you guys are doing with solar, but we just don't have the belief that we can actually build the factories here. And so China is saying, here's the land, here's the capital, here's the regulatory approval to go ahead and do that. And so that is how Australia cooked it. Not with one big decision, but thousands of little paper cuts that over time have hurt our own collective sense of imagination on what could be done. So the solar industry is dead. I just need to get over it. Charlie, move on. The next $1 trillion bus. Okay, so we missed the last $1 trillion bus that was solar panel manufacturing. Are we going to do it again with the next one? Because the sequel to this story is not about panels, it's about batteries. Solar panels and batteries are like Batman and Robin, and I hate to break it to you, but I think the panels are Robin. Without storage, solar is cheap electricity for just 6 hours a day. But with storage, people like Casey Hanmer argue that you massively simplify the grid by using a behind-the-meter approach. And in time when the cost of panels and batteries is low enough, you can power big power-hungry things like data centers and manufacturing plants. Now this unlocks the rest of Australian industry down the track. Batteries sit in every EV, every home storage site, every industrial site. So what's Australia's opportunity going into this? Right now, we dig up around half the world's lithium, and the positions chop and change every year, but we are #1 producer by a mile. And once again, and I'm feeling deja vu here, we are the ore producing superpower at the bottom of the value chain. The question is the same as solar. Do we just ship the rocks out and let someone else turn them into money and power, or do we move up the value chain, producing things like the actual cells and the chemicals, the actual battery systems? So what do we actually have to change in this country? Well, for me, it boils down to 3 moves. 1, treat cheap power as table stakes. We should not be paying some of the world's highest power prices in a country that's flush with energy resources. That is just plain dumb. If we're serious, we pick a few locations in the country and turn them into energy super zones, where you chuck a bunch of power generation, transmission, and actual industry together, and you can forget about the grid and let it all run behind the meter. Now, to be clear, I don't really care whether that's coal, or gas, or solar, or wind, or nuclear. All I care is that the price of energy comes down enough to give those industries a chance of taking off. Remember, we are trying to build a clean industry, and for that, weirdly, you need cheap power. Until that's true, Future Made in Australia is a sexy sounding slogan, and a damn sexy one at that. Number 2, assume heavy automation from day one. We need to stop pretending that high wages is making manufacturing impossible. Modern battery plants do not look like rows and rows of Uber Eats drivers. They're clean, they're automated, and they're very, very expensive facilities, and we have the money. Yes, labor cost is a factor, but it's not the whole story. If we want to compete, we need to assume A, robots, B, fewer employees that are paid a higher salary because they're doing programming, engineering, systems design, and C, that over time, the cost of these things will come down, but they're going to be very expensive at the start. And that means accepting something that politicians hate to do, which is to look past immediate projections about how much things cost, because doing hard things early is always going to cost more. We need to think about the long term. And this has been exactly the kind of bet that China's been willing to make. And yes, they have centralized decision making, and we don't need their politics. But there are some leaves out of the book of China that we can definitely take. We do need a willingness to put our thumb heavily on the scale, which brings me to point 3. We weaponize the super funds. This is the thing that no one outside Australia realizes. Australia's super funds are massive, 4th in the world in terms of pension funds, and about to be 2nd despite our tiny, tiny population. And we can turn that huge stream of capital into stuff that benefits the country. At the moment, most of that money goes offshore into shares and infrastructure projects, etc. But if we actually believe in Australia and our future, we should be comfortable saying something like, you know, that National Reconstruction Fund that we started a few years ago with a paltry $15 billion? Well, let's make that ongoing, and let's redirect a percentage of everyone's super to that fund and let them make real investments in Australia. So they've started well, it just needs more reliable ongoing capital. And before you scream and say, hey, that's my money, I don't want the government taking it, it's not more tax. No, the returns flow back to the actual workers that made the contributions. This is what I mean by weaponizing super funds. It's not handouts, it's not charity, it's turning one of the world's biggest pools of capital into a slingshot that can shortcut us to greatness. Now, if we can do those things right even once or twice, this idea that Australia can't actually make anything goes from a fact to being a lazy idea that we used to think about ourselves. And if we don't do that, I guess in 20 years' time, I'll be making the same video about batteries. Okay, I hope that fired you up. Remember, chuck me a sub, check out the newsletter. Love yous all. Ubida.